The air in the 50th floor boardroom was worth more than the oxygen on the street, but it was suffocating. At the head of the polished mahogany table sat Brennan Ashford, heir to a billion-dollar tech empire, and beside him his mistress Katrina Monroe, her hand resting possessively on his. They were there to carve up a king's fortune. Across from them, the family lawyer looked on with a stony expression as Brennan spoke his words dripping with venom for his absent pregnant wife. He was painting her as a villain, a gold digger, a woman about to be written out of history. But history, like a loaded gun, was waiting just outside the door. And the woman he was destroying was about to walk in and pull the trigger. The law offices of Cole and Associates occupied the 3 highest floors of the One Vanderbilt Tower, a steel and glass needle piercing the Manhattan skyline. The view from the main conference room was a god's-eye panorama of the city, but no one was looking at it. All eyes were on the man at the head of the table, Brennan Ashford. He had the kind of casual, expensive confidence that came from a lifetime of never hearing the word no. His suit was Tom Ford, his watch a Patek Philippe, and his grief, it seemed, was entirely custom-made for the occasion. His father, Walter Ashford, the titan behind Ashford Innovations, had been buried 2 days ago. Today was the reading of the will, the formal transfer of power, and Brennan was acting less like a grieving son and more like a king ascending his throne. To his right sat his younger sister, Phoebe Ashford, a woman whose life was a curated collection of charity luncheons and equestrian events. Phoebe seemed perpetually lost, her wide, anxious eyes darting between her brother and the lawyer. She clutched a small, jewel-encrusted handbag like a life raft. To Brennan's left, however, was the real focal point of the room's tension. Katrina Monroe. She was stunning in a severe, sculptural way that contrasted sharply with Brennan's wife. Dressed in a form-fitting black dress that was just a shade too provocative for a somber legal meeting, she projected an aura of triumphant ownership. Her perfectly manicured hand, adorned with a canary diamond that was certainly not from Brennan's wife, rested on his forearm. She was a declaration of war made flesh. At the other end of the long table, Mr. Lawrence Cole Walter Ashford's lawyer for 40 years adjusted his glasses. He was a man made of tweed leather-bound books and quiet disappointment. He had watched Brennan grow from a spoiled boy into a man who wore his father's legacy like a costume, and his expression was one of profound professional neutrality that failed to mask a deep personal weariness. "If we're all present," Mr. Cole began, his voice a dry rustle of paper, "we can proceed. The will of Walter Henry Ashford is quite direct." "Let's get on with it, Lawrence," Brennan said, a dismissive wave of his hand. "We all know what it says. Dad knew who built this company with him, who was ready to take it into the future." He squeezed Katrina's hand pointedly. "And who wasn't?" The jab was aimed squarely at his wife, Gracie Davies. The official story, the one Brennan had been spinning for the last 6 months, was that their marriage had tragically crumbled under the weight of his father's illness. That Gracie, cold and calculating, had shown her true colors when the family needed unity the most. The tabloids, fed by anonymous sources that sounded suspiciously like Brennan's publicist, had hinted at her greed, her emotional distance, her unsuitability as the matriarch of the Ashford dynasty. "Where is Gracie Brennan?" Phoebe whispered, her voice trembling slightly. "Shouldn't she be here? She's still your wife. And she's, you know." She gestured vaguely towards her own stomach. Brennan's jaw tightened. Gracie was informed of the time and place. If she chooses not to attend, that is her decision. Frankly, it's for the best. This is a day for family, for those who genuinely cared for my father. He looked at Katrina, his eyes softening with a look of manufactured devotion. Katrina was a great comfort to my father in his final months, a better friend to him than his own daughter-in-law ever was. Katrina offered a small, sad smile to the room. Walter was a wonderful man. I miss him terribly. I'm just here to support Brennan. Her voice was soft, melodic, and utterly false. She had met Walter Ashford twice, both times at tense charity galas, where the old man had looked right through her. Mr. Cole cleared his throat, a sound like gravel grinding. The will makes a specific provision for Gracie Ashford, formerly Davies. Her presence is requested but not under the initial articles legally required for the primary reading. He deliberately avoided looking at Katrina. Shall I begin? Brennan nodded, leaning back in his chair with the smug satisfaction of a man who had already won. He looked at Katrina, a silent promise passing between them. The empire was his. The money was his. And soon, the woman beside him would be his wife, and the inconvenient one carrying his child would be a footnote, a payoff, a distant and unpleasant memory. The vultures were perched, knives and forks were in hand, and the feast was about to be served. They had no idea they were the ones on the menu. Mr. Cole broke the seal on a thick cream-colored envelope with a quiet crackle that seemed to echo in the silent room. He unfolded the document, the dense legal text, a fortress protecting Walter Ashford's final commands. I, Walter Henry Ashford, he began, his voice taking on the formal cadence of legal scripture, being of sound mind and body, do hereby declare this to be my last will and testament, revoking all previous wills and codicils. Brennan steepled his fingers, a portrait of impatient authority. Katrina sat unnaturally still, her painted-on mask of serene support starting to feel tight around the edges. Only Phoebe fidgeted, twisting a diamond ring on her finger. To my beloved daughter, Phoebe Ashford. Mr. Cole read, I bequeath a trust fund in the amount of $50 million to be managed by the Ashford Estate Executor. This trust will provide for your lifetime, ensuring your comfort and security. I also leave you my collection of impressionist art and the summer home in the Hamptons. May it bring you the peace you have always sought. Phoebe let out a shaky breath, a mixture of relief and sorrow. It was a generous, almost dismissive sum, enough to keep her in designer clothes and charity galas for the rest of her life. But it kept her far from the levers of real power. It was a gilded cage, and she was, as always, its willing occupant. Oh, she whispered. That's very kind of Daddy. Brennan gave her a patronizing smile. He always took care of you, Phoebes. The subtext was clear. Now for the important part. Mr. Cole continued, his eyes scanning the page. To my various household and corporate staff, there are a series of smaller bequests and pensions detailed in Appendix A in gratitude for their years of loyal service. He paused, taking a slow sip of water. The tension in the room ratcheted up a notch. This was it. Regarding my wife, Gracie Davies Ashford, Mr. Cole said, and Brennan sat bolt upright. Katrina's hand, which had been resting on his, tightened its grip. Given the recent difficulties in her marriage to my son, I bequeath to her the sum of $10 million, conditional upon the signing of a non-disclosure agreement regarding her time with the Ashford family. This sum is to be considered a final settlement." A wave of triumph washed over Brennan's face. It was perfect, more than enough to look generous, but a pittance compared to the full inheritance. It painted Gracie as a problem being paid off, a nuisance being silenced. He shot a smug look at Katrina, who allowed herself a tiny, victorious smile. $10 million to disappear forever. A bargain. "And now," Mr. Cole said, turning to the final, most crucial page, "the remainder of my estate, including my controlling shares in Ashford Innovations, my personal properties, high liquid assets, and all subsidiary holdings I leave to my only son." He paused, and in that second of silence, Brennan Ashford felt the world solidify beneath his feet. He saw the future spooling out before him. Board meetings where he was the unquestioned authority, magazine covers hailing him as the new visionary of tech, and Katrina draped in diamonds on his arm. "Brennan Michael Ashford," Mr. Cole concluded. "He shall also assume the role of executor of my estate. This is my final wish." The words hung in the air, final and absolute. Brennan let out a long, slow breath he hadn't realized he was holding. He had done it. The old man had come through. All his fears that his father saw his recklessness, his affairs, his fundamental lack of seriousness were unfounded. He stood up his chair, scraping back harshly. He was the king now. "Thank you, Lawrence," he said, his voice thick with emotion he wasn't truly feeling. He turned to the small audience. My father was a great man, a hard man, but he was a builder, and he knew that to build a future, you sometimes have to tear down the past." He looked from Phoebe's tear-streaked face to Katrina's adoring one. He knew this company needed strong, decisive leadership. He knew it needed a vision untethered from hesitation. It was a speech he had rehearsed, a thinly veiled condemnation of his wife, Gracie. Everyone in their circle knew she had a brilliant strategic mind. She had an MBA from Stanford and had been a rising star at a consulting firm before she married him. In the early years, she had been his secret weapon, honing his presentations, refining his ideas. But her careful analytical approach had begun to feel like a criticism to Brennan's ego. He called it hesitation. His father had called it wisdom. "And I want to be clear about something," Brennan continued, his voice rising with newfound power. He took Katrina's hand and pulled her to her feet beside him. "Katrina has been my rock through all of this. She stood by me when others were distant." He stroked her cheek. "She understands the pressures I face, the vision I have. She is the future of this family, and I will not have her or her role in my life questioned by anyone." He was defending his mistress at the reading of his father's will. It was a brazen, shocking display of disrespect, not only to his marriage, but to his father's memory. Phoebe gasped softly. Mr. Cole's face was a granite mask betraying nothing. Katrina looked up at Brennan, her eyes shining. "Oh, Brennan," she whispered, playing her part to perfection. Brennan nodded resolute. "As my first act as executor, I want the paperwork for Gracie's settlement drawn up immediately. We'll have it couriered over. There's no need to drag this out." "That will not be necessary." The voice was quiet, calm, and clear. It came from the doorway, and it cut through the charged atmosphere of the room like a shard of ice. Every head swiveled towards the grand double doors of the boardroom. Standing there framed by the dark, polished wood was Gracie Davies Ashford. She was not the hysterical, weeping woman Brennan had described to his friends. She was not the defeated, broken creature he had imagined would come crawling for a settlement. She was a vision of unnerving composure. She was 7 months pregnant, the gentle swell of her belly prominent beneath a simple, elegant navy blue dress. Her dark hair was pulled back in a neat chignon, and her face, though pale, was serene. Her eyes, a deep, intelligent grey, held no tears, only a profound and steady calm that was far more terrifying than any rage could have been. She looked like a queen who had come not to plead for her throne, but to reclaim it. In her hand, she held a single large manila envelope, sealed with a distinctive dark green wax stamp. For a moment, the room was utterly still, a tableau of shock. Phoebe's hand flew to her mouth. Katrina's triumphant smile dissolved her face, tightening with a flicker of pure, unadulterated panic. She instinctively took a step back from Brennan, as if proximity to him had suddenly become dangerous. Brennan was the first to recover his shock, curdling instantly into fury. "Gracie!" he snarled, his voice a low growl. "What the hell are you doing here? I told you this was for family only." "I am family, Brennan," she replied, her voice even and cool. "I am your wife, and I am the mother of your child, your father's grandchild." She took a step into the room, the doors clicking softly shut behind her. Her presence seemed to shrink the cavernous space, drawing all the energy and attention towards her. "We are in the middle of something important," Brennan snapped, gesturing around the room as if to prove his point. "You're late. We've already concluded the primary reading." "I'm not late," Gracie said, her gaze shifting from her husband to the lawyer at the end of the table. "I'm right on time. Hello, Mr. Cole." Lawrence Cole inclined his head, a flicker of something unreadable in his old eyes. "Gracie, we are glad you could make it." His tone was markedly more respectful than the one he had used with Brennan. Brennan scoffed a harsh, ugly sound. "Glad she could make it. She's here to make a scene, to try and squeeze more money out of this. I should have known." He turned back to Gracie, his face a mask of contempt. "It's over, Jen. The will has been read. You get your 10 million. Now take your little payday and go. Don't embarrass yourself further." He gestured towards Katrina, a possessive and defiant act. "My life is with Katrina now. We're moving forward. You should do the same." Gracie's calm expression didn't waver. She didn't even glance at Katrina, a dismissal more profound than any insult. It was as if the other woman simply didn't exist. Instead, she walked gracefully towards the table, her steps measured and deliberate. She stopped beside an empty chair, the one that had clearly been set for her, and placed the manila envelope on the gleaming mahogany surface. The green wax seal seemed to go under the recessed lighting. "What is that?" Brennan demanded, suspicion lacing his voice. "This," Gracie said, her hand resting lightly on the envelope, "is what I came to deliver. It was entrusted to me by your father 2 weeks before he passed." A nervous energy rippled through the room. Phoebe stared at the envelope as if it were a venomous snake. Brennan's bravado faltered, replaced by a flicker of genuine uncertainty. "My father was sick, heavily medicated." "Anything he gave you is irrelevant," he blustered. "He was probably delirious. He wasn't in his right mind." "Oh, he was perfectly lucid, Brennan," Gracie said, her voice dropping a little, taking on a note of intimate memory that excluded everyone else. "He was tired, yes, but his mind was as sharp as ever. Sharper, perhaps. He saw things very, very clearly at the end." She pushed the envelope gently across the polished table until it stopped directly in front of Mr. Cole. "Walter asked me to bring this here today. He instructed me to wait until after the initial will was read. He said it was important for everyone to show their true colors first." Her grey eyes finally moved to her husband, and for the first time a sliver of ice-cold fire was visible within them. "And you, my dear husband, did not disappoint." Mr. Cole picked up the envelope, his long, papery fingers examining the seal. He looked at Brennan, then at Gracie. He knew that seal. It was Walter Ashford's private mark, the one he used for his most confidential and important correspondence. "What does it say, Lawrence?" Brennan demanded, his voice now a little too loud, a little too strained. "It's probably just some sentimental nonsense. A letter." "It does not feel like a letter," Mr. Cole said quietly, testing the weight and stiffness of the envelope. He looked at Gracie. "You are presenting this as a legal document to be entered into the proceedings. I am presenting it as Walter Ashford's final binding directive," Gracie corrected him gently. "He assured me it would clarify his intentions." The word clarify hung in the air, laden with unspoken threat. The gilded cage Brennan had just inherited suddenly felt fragile, its bars made not of gold, but of glass. And Gracie had just brought a hammer. The boardroom had become a pressure cooker. The air once filled with Brennan's arrogant pronouncements was now thick with a tense, humming silence. All the power, all the momentum had shifted from the head of the table to the woman standing quietly by its side. Mr. Cole held the envelope, his expression a careful study in legal impassivity. He ran a thumb over the green wax seal embossed with the distinctive A of the Ashford family crest. "This is indeed Walter's private seal," he confirmed, his voice low and serious. The statement landed like a judge's gavel. It gave the document an immediate, unimpeachable authenticity. Brennan's face was a storm of conflicting emotions, rage, disbelief, and a creeping, snake-like fear. "This is absurd. A theatrical stunt. My father's will has been read. It's done. This is a desperate, last-ditch attempt to contest it by a woman who knows she's been cut out." He turned on Gracie, his voice rising. "What did you do? Jen? Did you bully a sick old man on his deathbed, whisper poison in his ear when he was too weak to fight back?" Gracie met his accusations without flinching. "Your father was many things, Brennan, but weak was never one of them. He knew exactly what he was doing. He also knew you." She let that last sentence hang in the air, a devastatingly simple indictment. "This is irregular," Brennan insisted, turning his appeal to the lawyer. "Lawrence, you can't possibly take this seriously. We proceed with the execution of the will as read. That is the proper legal procedure." "The proper legal procedure," Mr. Cole countered, his voice as sharp and precise as a scalpel, "is to examine any and all documents purported to be a final testament or codicil of the deceased, especially when presented under such circumstances. To ignore it would be a gross dereliction of my fiduciary duty." He picked up a slender silver letter opener from his desk set. "With the consent of the present parties, I will open this envelope." "I do not consent!" Brennan shouted, slamming his hand on the table. The sharp crack made Phoebe jump. Katrina flinched, her carefully constructed composure finally shattering, replaced by a look of naked greed and fear. Her dream was slipping through her fingers. "Your consent is not required, Brennan," Mr. Cole said flatly. "As the potential executor, you are a party of interest, and therefore cannot unilaterally obstruct the process. Gracie, as the presenter of the document, has given her implicit consent. Phoebe." Phoebe looked from her furious brother to her strangely serene sister-in-law, her face a mess of confusion. "I think we should see what Daddy wanted," she stammered. "Whatever it is." "Thank you, Phoebe," Mr. Cole said. He ignored Brennan's sputtering protests and slid the letter opener cleanly under the wax seal. The sound of tearing paper was offensively loud in the quiet room. Brennan was on his feet now, pacing behind his chair like a caged animal. "This is a farce. Whatever is in there is a forgery. Gracie has been planning this for months, ever since she knew I was leaving her." "Be quiet, Brennan," Gracie said, her voice still quiet, but now edged with steel. "For once in your life, listen." Mr. Cole carefully extracted 2 separate documents from the envelope. The first was a multi-page document bound by a blue legal ribbon, clearly a formal codicil. The second was thinner, a single folded sheet of Walter Ashford's personal heavyweight stationery. He unfolded the letter first. His eyes scanned the familiar, spiky handwriting of his old friend and client. He read it silently, his expression unreadable, but the longer he read, the deeper the lines on his forehead seemed to etch themselves. The silence stretched, becoming unbearable. "Well," Brennan demanded, "what is it?" "A love letter to his precious daughter-in-law." Mr. Cole looked up not at Brennan, but at Gracie. He gave a slow, almost imperceptible nod, a sign of confirmation passing between them. A silent acknowledgement that the plan Walter had set in motion was now officially underway. He then cleared his throat and addressed the room. "This is a letter from Walter," he announced. "It is dated 2 weeks ago. It is signed and his signature is verified by his personal physician, confirming he was of sound mind and not under duress. The letter serves as an explanatory note for the accompanying legal document." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "The legal document," he continued, picking up the ribbon-bound papers, "is a duly witnessed and notarized codicil to the last will and testament of Walter Henry Ashford." A collective gasp went through the room. A codicil. A legal amendment. The will they had just heard read was not the final word after all. Katrina sank back into her chair, her face ashen. The canary diamond on her finger suddenly looked garish and cheap. "A codicil," Brennan repeated, his voice hollow with disbelief. "What does it say?" Mr. Cole adjusted his glasses, his gaze cold and direct as it landed on Brennan. "It says, and I quote from Walter's accompanying letter, 'I have recently been forced to acknowledge a profound error in judgment regarding my son's character. An inheritance is not a prize to be won. It is a responsibility to be earned. A legacy is not a toy to be played with, but a trust to be honored.'" He then picked up the codicil itself. "This document fundamentally alters the disposition of the estate as previously outlined. It begins with the invocation of a new clause." He looked directly at Brennan, his eyes seeming to bore right through him. "It is entitled Article 7, the Morality and Fidelity Clause." The phrase Morality and Fidelity Clause landed in the center of the room like a grenade. Brennan stared at Mr. Cole, his face slack with a dawning, horrified comprehension. "A what clause?" He stammered, the words catching in his throat. "A morality and fidelity clause." Mr. Cole repeated, his voice devoid of any emotion. He began to read directly from the codicil, the dense legalese a death knell for Brennan's ambitions. "This clause is hereby enacted as a primary condition for the inheritance of any and all controlling interests in Ashford Innovations and the associated liquid assets by my son, Brennan Michael Ashford. The inheritance is contingent upon his demonstrated commitment to the values of the Ashford family name, integrity, loyalty, and discretion." He paused, looking over his glasses at Brennan, who was now pale as a ghost. "It continues, should Brennan at the time of the reading of this will be engaged in any public or private scandal that brings dishonor to the family, or should he be found to have been demonstrably unfaithful to his marital vows to Gracie Davies Ashford, all bequests made to him in Article 6 of the primary will are rendered null and void." The room was so silent you could hear the faint hum of the building's ventilation system. Katrina made a small, strangled sound. This was about her. This was a direct, posthumous strike from the old man, aimed with surgical precision at her and Brennan's affair. "This is insane," Brennan finally exploded, finding his voice. "He can't do that. It's medieval. You can't disinherit someone for their personal life." "On the contrary," Mr. Cole stated calmly, not looking up from the page. "A testator can place almost any condition on an inheritance so long as it is not illegal or against public policy." And Walter was very thorough. He specifically cites the protection of the company's brand and shareholder value from the potential fallout of reckless personal behavior. It is perfectly legal and perfectly binding. Brennan whirled on Gracie, his eyes wild with accusation. You did this. You poisoned him against me." "I never said a word to him about Katrina," Gracie replied, her voice steady as a rock. "I didn't have to. Walter wasn't blind, Brennan. He was just quiet. He saw the way you looked at her at the last foundation gala. He saw the late-night credit card receipts from hotels I've never been to. He saw the articles your own publicist planted in the gossip columns to lay the groundwork for our divorce. He saw everything. The specificity of her knowledge hit Brennan like a physical blow. She had known. She had known all along and had said nothing, simply watching, waiting. "So what?" Brennan spat, trying to rally. "It's my word against hers." "How can you prove anything? There's no proof right here, right now." He looked around the room, a desperate, pleading look in his eyes. He was searching for a loophole, a way out. He had brought Katrina here himself. He had defended her, proclaimed her the future of his family just minutes earlier. He had walked himself with his own breathtaking arrogance directly into his father's trap. "I believe," Mr. Cole said, his voice laced with an almost imperceptible touch of irony, "that your own impassioned speech a few moments ago, defending Ms. Monroe and declaring your intention to build a life with her in the presence of 3 witnesses, would be considered demonstrably unfaithful by any court in this state." Checkmate. The trap had sprung. But Walter Ashford was not finished. The clause was the sword, but the old man had forged a second, even more devastating weapon. Mr. Cole put down the codicil. "This clause effectively voids your inheritance of the company and the bulk of the estate, Brennan. The codicil dictates that in this event, the entire portion bequeathed to you would be placed into a charitable trust, the Walter Ashford Foundation for Ethical Innovation." For a second, it seemed that was the end of it. The company lost the money gone, all of it funneled into a charity. A complete and total disinheritance. Brennan looked crushed, but a part of him almost seemed relieved. If he couldn't have it, at least Gracie couldn't either. But then Mr. Cole picked up the manila envelope again. There was still a document inside. "However," the lawyer said, his voice dropping significantly, "there is a second document. This is not a part of the will. It is a separate, legally binding instrument." He slid out a sheaf of papers stapled together, and bearing the letterhead, not of his law firm, but of a private investment group. "What is that?" Phoebe whispered, her voice barely audible. This, Mr. Cole announced, is a private partnership and management transfer agreement for Ashford Innovations executed between Walter Ashford and Gracie Davies Ashford. The second bombshell was more powerful than the first. Brennan stared, his mouth agape. A partnership? What are you talking about? She never worked for the company. That's where you're wrong, Gracie said softly, speaking for the first time since the revelation. For the last 18 months, after you started losing interest in the actual work and became more interested in the lifestyle I've been meeting with your father. Secretly. She painted a picture that Brennan could barely comprehend. Late-night calls, weekend meetings at the city library. Walter, disillusioned with his son's lack of vision, had found a willing and brilliant apprentice in his daughter-in-law. He had recognized the strategic mind he had always wished his own son possessed. The Phoenix Project, that AI integration that saved the fourth quarter last year, Gracie said, her eyes locked on Brennan's. That was my proposal. The pivot to sustainable tech that landed the company on the cover of Wired Walter, and I drafted that plan on my kitchen table. He was mentoring me, Brennan. He was teaching me how to run his company, because he knew he couldn't trust it to you. Mr. Cole held up the final document. This agreement establishes a new controlling entity for Ashford Innovations. It bypasses the will entirely. Upon Walter's death, his 51% controlling stake in the company was not to be transferred to his estate, but was automatically sold for a nominal sum of $1 to this pre-established entity, an entity for which Gracie Davies Ashford is the sole director and majority shareholder. He let the words sink in. Brennan hadn't just been disinherited. He had been surgically removed. The company wasn't going to charity, it was going to Gracie. The document stipulates the shares are to be held in trust for her and for the natural-born heir of the Ashford lineage, her child, Mr. Cole concluded. Brennan, you are left with the Manhattan penthouse, which was in your name already, and a personal trust fund your grandfather set up for you years ago. It is a substantial amount by any normal standard, but you no longer have any connection to or control over Ashford Innovations. The empire was gone. The throne he had been so eager to claim had just vanished from beneath him, reappearing under the woman he had tried to cast aside. The true papers weren't just a will. They were a corporate coup executed from beyond the grave. And Gracie wasn't just the grieving widow. She was the new CEO. The silence that followed Mr. Cole's final pronouncement was a living thing, heavy and suffocating. For a long, drawn-out moment, Brennan Ashford simply stood there, his face a canvas of utter devastation. The confident, swaggering air had been hollowed out, leaving behind a bewildered, pathetic shell. The crown he had placed on his own head had shattered into a million pieces. Then the disbelief gave way to a primal, guttural rage. No! The roar was animalistic, echoing off the glass and polished wood of the boardroom. No, I don't accept this. This is a lie, a conspiracy. He lunged across the table, not at Gracie but at the papers in Mr. Cole's hands. Let me see that, it's a forgery. She forged it. She tricked him. Mr. Cole, with the surprising quickness of an old man who has dealt with his share of tantrums, pulled the documents back, holding them protectively to his chest. Brennan, control yourself. These documents are ironclad. They have been authenticated. Walter's signature is on every page, witnessed by an independent counsel and 2 members of his board. Brennan's wild eyes darted around the room, looking for an ally, for anyone who would validate his sense of cosmic injustice. He looked at his sister Phoebe, who was staring at Gracie with a new dawning expression of awe and confusion. No help there. His gaze finally landed on Katrina, the woman he had defended, the woman he had sacrificed an empire for. "Katrina," he pleaded, his voice cracking. Tell them how she manipulated him, how she was never there for him." But Katrina Monroe was a creature of calculated survival. She had hitched her wagon to a stallion and just discovered he was a gelding. The mask of the loving, supportive partner was gone, replaced by a shrewish, panicked fury. "You told me it was yours!" She shrieked, her voice high and sharp. She wasn't looking at Brennan with sympathy, but with the utter contempt of a predator whose prey has just dissolved into dust. "You swore to me, you said your father was an old fool who adored you. You promised me everything. I thought it was—" Brennan yelled back, gesturing helplessly. "He was my father. Some son you are." Katrina shot back, her carefully curated elegance completely gone. She pointed a shaking, red-nailed finger at him. "You lost it all. For what? For her." She turned her venom on Gracie. "You think you're so clever, don't you? Sitting there all smug with your belly." Gracie didn't rise to the bait. She simply looked at Katrina, a flicker of something almost like pity in her eyes. "This was never about you, Katrina. You were just a symptom of the problem, a predictable one." The casual, clinical dismissal was more infuriating to Katrina than any insult. "I loved him," she cried, a last desperate gamble at playing the victim. "You loved the idea of him," Gracie corrected her, her voice soft but firm. "You loved the Ashford name, the penthouses, the private jets. You never once asked him about his work, his passions, his fears. You just saw a prize, and you tried to claim it. I can't even be angry at you. It's just what you are." Defeated, exposed, and stripped of her leverage, Katrina grabbed her ridiculously expensive handbag from the floor. "This is a nightmare," she hissed primarily to herself. She shot one last, hate-filled glare at Brennan. "Don't you dare call me!" And with that, she turned and stormed out of the boardroom, her heels clicking an angry staccato on the marble floor of the hallway. The future Mrs. Ashford was gone, her dreams of a billion-dollar lifestyle evaporating with every step. Brennan watched her go, the final pillar of his deluded reality collapsing. He sank into his chair, a broken man, all the fight gone out of him. He stared at his hands on the table, the hands that were supposed to be running a global corporation, now empty. "Why?" he whispered, his question directed at Gracie. "Why would he do this to me? I was his son." For the first time, Gracie's composure softened, a genuine wave of sorrow washing over her features. She walked around the table and stood before her husband. "He did it because you are his son, Brennan," she said, her voice gentle. "He loved you, but he saw you were drowning in ego, in insecurity, in your desperate need to prove you weren't just Walter Ashford's son. He built that company from nothing. It was his life's work, his real child. He couldn't let you destroy it, and he knew you would have." She let out a heavy sigh. "He also did it for our child. He wanted his grandchild to be raised with the values he tried to instill in you: humility, hard work, integrity. He didn't want our baby to grow up in the shadow of your scandals. He did this to protect his legacy and to protect his family. Both of them." She placed a hand on her stomach. "He told me in one of our last conversations that giving you everything you wanted would have been the cruelest thing he could possibly do to you. So he gave you a chance instead, a chance to build something of your own, to become your own man without his shadow." The explanation was not one of vengeance, but of a harsh, painful love. It was a truth more devastating to Brennan than any simple disinheritance. His father hadn't done this out of hate, but out of a profound and utter lack of faith. Mr. Cole cleared his throat, bringing the raw emotional moment back to the business at hand. "Brennan, I think it would be best if you left now. We have a lot of paperwork to get through." He looked at Gracie. "Madam Chairman." The new title hung in the air. Brennan flinched, as if he'd been struck. He looked at Gracie. Truly looked at her, perhaps for the first time in years. He didn't see the woman he'd cheated on, but the woman his father had chosen. The true heir. Without another word, he stood up. A man suddenly aged a decade and walked out of the room, leaving his name, his legacy, and his future behind him. The slam of the boardroom door as Brennan departed seemed to suck all the remaining rage out of the room, leaving a vacuum in its wake. The silence that rushed in to fill it was unlike any Gracie had ever experienced. It wasn't empty. It was dense, heavy with the ghosts of shouted words, shattered egos, and the quiet, calculating ghost of Walter Ashford himself, whose final gambit had been a masterpiece of posthumous strategy. The air still held the faint, cloying scent of Katrina's expensive perfume, a cheap fragrance trying and failing to mask the stench of scorched earth greed. An empty water glass stood where Brennan had sat, a single drop of condensation, tracing a path down its side like a tear. For a long moment, the three remaining figures were a tableau of the New World Order. Mr. Cole, the steadfast executor, stood as a bridge between the past and the future. Gracie, the unexpected queen, was the focal point of all the room's energy, and Phoebe, the forgotten princess, was finally seeing the world outside her gilded cage. Phoebe was the first to move, her actions tentative, as if she feared the slightest motion might shatter the fragile new reality. She looked at Gracie, but it was a different kind of look than she had ever given her before. The usual polite, distant gaze of a society sister-in-law was gone, replaced by a raw, bewildered awe. It was the look of someone who had just witnessed a magic trick and was now trying to see the hidden mechanisms behind it. "You knew," Phoebe breathed the words, barely a whisper. It wasn't an accusation, but a statement of profound wonder. All this time, while Brennan was parading that woman around, while the papers were printing those awful veiled stories, you knew what was coming. Gracie turned from the door, her shoulders slumping, just a fraction of an inch, the first sign of the immense strain she had been under. "I knew Brennan was being unfaithful," she corrected softly. "That part was painfully obvious, but I didn't know the full extent of your father's plan. Not until the end." She walked slowly, drawn by instinct, to the massive, floor-to-ceiling window that overlooked the sprawling urban kingdom of Manhattan. From 50 floors up, the ceaseless yellow cabs looked like blood cells moving through the city's arteries. A universe of commerce, ambition, and struggle played out below. Walter's universe, and now hers. "He called me to his study about a week before he entered the hospital for the last time," she continued, her voice taking on a distant, reflective quality as she recalled the memory. The room had smelled of old leather lemon polish and the faint, sweet scent of the unlit cigars he kept in a humidor on his desk. He had looked so diminished against the grandeur of his high-backed chair, a lion in winter, his physical strength waning, but the fierce intelligence in his eyes burning brighter than ever. He told me, "A legacy, my dear girl, is like a garden. You can't just hand it to someone who only wants to pick the flowers. You must give it to the one who is willing to tend the soil." He said he'd spent years watching Brennan, and that he saw a man who would burn the garden down just to complain about the ashes. Gracie traced a line on the cool glass with her fingertip. "He apologized to me for Brennan, for the humiliation. He said he saw the daughter he never had in me, someone who understood that power wasn't a prize, but a profound responsibility. Then he showed me the documents. The codicil, the partnership agreement. He made me promise I would see it through. He said I had to wait to let Brennan walk into the trap himself. It was the only way it would be final. The only way the board would understand the necessity of it. She turned back to face Phoebe, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. It was the hardest promise I have ever had to make. To smile through family dinners while my heart was breaking to carry his grandchild, while his own son was trying to erase me, to listen to whispers and read gossip and remain silent. It felt like a betrayal every single day. But I owed your father. He saw me. He believed in me when my own husband looked right through me. Phoebe's carefully maintained composure finally crumbled. A sob escaped her lips, and she moved across the room, closing the distance between them. In a gesture that was completely out of character for the usually reserved and image-conscious woman, she wrapped her arms around Gracie in a hug that was both fierce and fragile. "I'm so sorry, Jen." She wept into her sister-in-law's shoulder. "I'm sorry I was so blind. I saw the way Brennan treated you, how he dismissed your ideas. I never stood up to him. No one ever did. I believed the stories because it was easier than confronting him." She pulled back her mascara-smudged eyes, finding Gracie's. "Daddy knew what he was doing. He always did. He put the family in the right hands." Her gaze dropped to Gracie's belly, and a watery, genuine smile broke through her tears. He put his future in the right hands. A real warm smile finally touched Gracie's lips, reaching her tired eyes. "Thank you, Phoebe. That means more than you know." And Cole, who had been quietly and discreetly arranging the documents into neat piles, finally spoke his practical tone, grounding the raw, emotional moment. "Phoebe is right, Gracie. Walter made the correct choice. But it will not be an easy one." He gestured to the papers on the table. "The board of directors is comprised of men who were loyal to your father, yes. But they are also conservative, old-school industrialists. They will see a 30-something woman, his son's estranged wife, no less, taking over $1 billion legacy. They will be more than skeptical. Some will be hostile. You will have to prove yourself from the very first moment. Are you truly ready for the fight that comes next?" His question was not a challenge, but a final, necessary test. Was she ready for the weight of it all? Gracie took a deep, steadying breath. She looked from Phoebe's hopeful face to Mr. Cole's serious one. She looked at the documents on the table, the instruments of her liberation and her life's new purpose. Then she looked at the empty chair at the head of the table. It was more than a piece of furniture. It was a symbol, carved from dark walnut, upholstered in rich bottle-green leather, worn smooth by decades of Walter Ashford's presence. It was the seat of power. The throne. Brennan had seen it as a prize, a place to sit and be admired. Gracie saw it for what it was, a mantle. A heavy, lonely, and profoundly important responsibility. With a newfound grace and purpose, she walked to the head of the table. She didn't sit. Instead, she stood behind the chair, placing her hands on its solid, carved shoulders. She could feel the faint grain of the wood under her palms, a tangible link to the man who had entrusted her with his life's work. She was no longer just Gracie Davies, the brilliant consultant. She was no longer Gracie Ashford, the wronged wife. She was the guardian of a legacy, the architect of a future, the mother of the heir. She was everything Walter had needed her to be. "Yes, Mr. Cole," she said, and her voice was transformed. The quiet, gentle tone was gone, replaced by a clear, confident command that rang with an authority she hadn't known she possessed. "I am ready." Her eyes met his, and a silent understanding passed between them. The king was dead. A new era had begun. She gave the chair a final resolute touch, a silent promise to its former occupant. "Get the board on a conference call," she ordered, her voice crisp and decisive. "Inform them there has been a change in leadership. They have a new chairman to meet." She paused, a flicker of steel in her eyes. "And we have work to do." And so in the silent aftermath of a corporate earthquake, Gracie Ashford stood not as a victor gloating over the spoils of war, but as a leader stepping into the role she was always meant to have. This wasn't a story about revenge. It was a story about justice. It's a powerful reminder that true strength isn't about being the loudest voice in the room, but about having the patience, the intelligence, and the courage to play the long game. Walter Ashford didn't just leave his company to his daughter-in-law. He left it in the hands of the only person who truly understood its value and had the character to protect it for the next generation. A true legacy isn't what you leave for people. It's what you leave inside them. If this story of justice resonated with you, and if you believe that character is the ultimate inheritance, then let us know in the comments. Drop a Justice for Jen below to show your support. Don't forget to hit that like button, share this story with someone who needs to see the underdog win, and subscribe to our channel for more real-life stories where the truth always finds its light. Thank you for listening.